everybody, and welcome to a new video. So I finished coursework at the end of April-ish, and since then I've been going kind of crazy reading just fun books. So I thought it would be kind of fun to just like talk through what I've been reading lately. It started off like fairly innocuous, and then I think I'd been alone for too long. It was getting a little weird in this apartment, so it got a little weird, and then it's gone back to, it made a sharp 180 back to sort of normal and academic. So let's just like jump right in. So the book that has like kicked off my fun reading is Broken Rival by Tessa. So this is the arc for her new book. This is my first physical arc. This is supposed to come out on October 6th, I believe. And it's her first kind of foray into another genre. So this is like a time-traveling dystopian romance. It definitely is still like heavy on the romance plotline, and like classic Tessa Bailey, we have a man obsessed, and we're really kicking it into high gear with this one. But I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure what to expect from her. You know, with the dystopian, like I want some more hard-hitting political critique than what we get in something like Divergent. And yes, this is still Tessa Bailey, and it's still very romance heavy, but I appreciate what she did with it. Like, I don't think she really pulled a lot of punches. The writing still felt very confident, because the thing with the dystopian versus, you know, like a contemporary romance is that the world building has to be like a lot more intense. And so, well, some of it, I was a bit confused at the beginning with like what time people were coming from. I think it would have been interesting if we'd gotten a little bit more information about, you know, what her life was like before our main character had traveled back in the past, because basically she's the daughter of some scientists who have sort of started time traveling even when it's been made illegal, and they've come back to 2024 from like the 2070s or 2080s, I think, to try to stop this really devastating drought. She was pretty little when they came back, but she was old enough that I think she would have had more memory. So I think it would have been interesting if we'd gotten a bit more information about that. But I still think that the world building was really cool, and that sort of like the science aspects, the kind of like the time travel, I think the way that she wrote time traveling was really cool, is what I'm trying to get out here. And it's a really interesting concept. So I really love this, and I would definitely recommend, and I hope that Tessa Bailey does like some more kind of genre bending stuff, because this was really fun. And I think that you can also see the influence from what's currently going on in the United States in this. Like, I think that there are some very clear parallels that she's confronting here. So I definitely think that this was worth a read. I basically read it in one sitting. I started it when we were on our trip to PEI, but I only got like 100 pages in. And then when we came back, I just read it in a day. So really loved this. And then I was gonna say that my next book was a little bit more lighthearted, but not really. This is Alive and Wells by Bailey Hannah. As you can perhaps tell by the cover, this is like a cowboy summer romance. This one's set in BC, and it's kind of like the Elsie Silver books. Like, I love that it's set in Canada, because like you don't see a lot of books set in Canada, but it also just like throws me off all the time when they're mentioning like places or things that I'm familiar with. Like, they talk about going to Calgary Stampede. They don't actually go, but some of the guys go. They talk about having gone there. So I both love and hate that as a thing. Like, one thing, this guy is supposed to be from small town BC, but he unironically calls her darlin'. Like, why does this man have a Texas accent when he's from some random place in BC? So this book is about Cecily, who at the start of the book like flees an abusive marriage. She had made a friend on an online forum who offers her a job at this ranch. She shows up, the oldest brother, who's like the owner of the ranch, is not thrilled to have her there, because he's kind of immediately like, there's an immediate attraction, but he's also been burned a few too many times by like city girls who come out, wanna, you know, cosplay ranch life and then leave when they get bored. So he's kind of like preemptively pushing her away. But then obviously, you know, they start to get to know each other and sparks fly. This was another pretty quick read. I did really enjoy it. One thing that I didn't like at the end was that I wish that they'd had more conversations about sort of how to handle conflict as a couple given her past. Because there's this one scene where he's like rightfully upset, and he's getting mad, and he's yelling and is sort of getting in her face, and she basically like yells at him that, why don't you just hit me then? Which is an understandable reaction with like what she's just left, but she's not even like really mad or particularly like triggered in the moment. She's kind of just throwing it at him to like halt him in his tracks, and he's obviously like immediately apologetic, but I just feel like that also, it was kind of a low blow from her as well. And so like, not that she should be perfect and excellent and that this isn't gonna be like an issue, but I just wish that like after that fight they had acknowledged like, hey, we're a couple, we're obviously going to fight, so like how can we do this in a way where you feel safe and where we can like actually talk out the thing that we're fighting about, you know? Which is like a bit nitpicky, but for this kind of book I feel like it's fair to be a little bit nitpicky. And then next up, I read Half His Age by Jennette McCurdy, and I'm really conflicted on this one because I wanted to like it more than I did, but I also think some of the things that it's getting critiqued for are maybe a little bit unfair. So this is a book about a young girl who's 17. She lives in a smaller town in Alaska, and she starts a relationship with her high school creative writing teacher who's I think late 30s, he's married, he's got a young kid, and it's entirely from her point of view, and she sort of sees herself as the one really pursuing him. And so then they like start this relationship. It's obviously affecting her. She was raised by a single mom who wasn't really around a whole lot. She was always kind of chasing a new relationship. So Waldo spends a lot of time alone. I think that this book had a lot of potential. For me, it was always going to be a bit of a hard sell because the comparison to My Dark Vanessa is right there and really obvious. And My Dark Vanessa is one of like the best books that I've read in the last like, when did that come out? Like 6 years ago now? And I still love it. I think about it all the time, and it's such a well done book about this kind of topic. So I think that that comparison is right there, and this book just doesn't hit in the same way. I saw lots of interviews with Jennette McCurdy on this press tour, and I know that it is like semi-autobiographical, or it's very much at least inspired by her own experiences. And she did talk in an interview about like it being really important to her to not have a kind of perspective of Waldo when she's older looking back, that she wanted to keep it very much like Waldo in the moment. And I do think that that could work. Like, I don't think that this book has to have like an older version looking back, kind of like what you do have in My Dark Vanessa, but I still think that it just didn't work here because Waldo is both kind of too self-aware, but then also like too in her own head, because you do like need to communicate that this is wrong and that she is, you know, getting groomed to a certain extent, and that there are these like things that are impacting Waldo that Waldo maybe doesn't necessarily understand. But it's almost like sometimes she has too much clarity and sometimes she doesn't have enough. So then it just kind of feels like those perspectives are kind of fighting against each other. It both feels like it has like too much insight and then not enough considering the subject matter. And I think the thing that this book has gotten the most flack for is that it's kind of gratuitously gross, which I posted like a whole review on this. I think it's just on TikTok right now. I don't think it's on my Instagram. And I think that like the grossness could have worked because I think that it is like Waldo almost doing it for shock value for herself. She's like, look at how grown up I am. How kind of like street smart and wise I am, like I understand reality and how the world works. So it's almost like a way that she's convincing herself of what's going on in a way. But then because it doesn't ever really like move past the kind of crassness, it almost feels like the only substance then is the crassness. So I think that like that could work stylistically, but it's just the fact that it never kind of moved beyond that is more of the issue. And it gets like grosser as the book progresses, which again, I think could work. It's just because it never went anywhere. Like it never moved beyond that it doesn't. And maybe in some ways that works, where it's just like, does any of this have meaning? Maybe not really. Like, why do we have to assign meaning to it? But this is almost like me more so talking myself into feeling like it worked more than it actually did in the book, if any of that makes sense. I'm also kind of conflicted with some of the things that Jennette McCurdy was saying on the press tour, because she was talking about like that this book is about, you know, female rage and about being like really embodied, which I don't think is necessarily reflected in the book. Like, Waldo is going through it. But one thing that I do think is really interesting about the kind of like grossness of it is that a lot of it is more about other people's bodies than her own. So in some ways it does kind of feel like there's maybe a disconnect from her own body. And I think that that could be really interesting. And again, one of the most interesting parts of the book to me was like when Waldo would go on these really like big shopping sprees, or when she was like frantically getting ready for a date and kind of trying on different personas in her clothes, but then feeling like none of them worked, and then getting this kind of validation and then feeling like it does work. Like, that was a really interesting angle. And I think that, again, like, this kind of idea of her trying to connect with her own body could be quite interesting. I just don't know if the book ever totally did that. And Jennette McCurdy also wanted to talk about like how complicated these kinds of relationships can be in the subject matter, and the idea of like Waldo being very self-assured and knowing what she wants and like going after it, and like her kind of being the pursuer, which I just don't feel like is very true to the book at all. Like, Waldo is incredibly insecure, and yeah, she's the one kind of where it feels like she's making moves, but like, is she actually making moves? Debatable. Like, I think that some of the messaging was just not what the reality of the book was, and also I think is something that is really tricky and really problematic to kind of like get into in a way. Like, I think that the book actually did this angle where Waldo is very clearly being groomed and is sort of like, but doesn't necessarily feel like she is. I think that the book communicates that a lot better than what was even being described during the press tour. So I don't know. I did get more into the prose as the book went on. At the beginning, it felt very kind of like staccato. I don't know, like, it's a lot of simple sentences, which is something that I noticed in Jennette McCurdy's memoir, which I did enjoy, but I listened to it on audiobook, and it again is a lot of very like short, simple, kind of blunt sentences, which I thought was maybe just like her narration style, or maybe it was like a choice for the memoir, especially because so much of it is like her looking back or her kind of writing from the point of view of her younger self. So I was like, maybe that was the idea of kind of getting into this younger headspace, but that was also the case in this book. So I think it's maybe just partly her writing style, which is totally okay. It does just feel a bit choppy sometimes when you're reading it, especially at first, but once you get into the prose, I think it's okay. So that was just something, I guess. I don't know, I feel like it was fine, but like, just read My Dark Vanessa instead. Okay, and then next up, I read an arc of the new Avenging Angels book in Kristen Ashley's Avenging Angels series. So this one is called A Lick and a Promise. I do not like the cover, so we're just gonna move past that. I've been enjoying this series. I think it's fun. I think I've been getting a bit less into it as it continues, but I was really excited for this book because it's Luna and Nox, and we've been kind of teased with them in the previous books. So we know that they're kind of both like clearly into each other, but for some reason weren't taking it there, because we got this idea that like neither of them wanted to like mess up the friend group. But in Luna and Nox's book, you find out that actually they had been hooking up. They'd been together for a couple of weeks, and then everything kind of blew up, and now they've been like split and are kind of like avoiding but also circling each other. And at the start of this book, Nox gets injured because we find out his family is crazy and is into some really dangerous stuff, and he went to try to like get them to leave him alone, wound up getting hurt, so Luna gets involved again, and then it kind of like kicks their relationship into gear. And this is the thing that I'm not liking about these current books, is because it's very like over the top and ridiculous. These women are like Charlie's Angels types who have like this rich benefactor that just like gives them stuff to go be vigilantes, and then obviously the men in like the private investigation company are all like former special ops Navy SEALs. Like, they're all ridiculously highly trained, overqualified, whatever. And then these women are like running around getting involved with the Russian mob, and the men are like, this is maybe dumb, maybe you shouldn't do that. And then what I don't like about the current books is that they're turning like the Avenging Angels thing into a feminist issue. Like when Nox is like, this is the thing that caused them to break up. Nox was like, you gotta stop being a vigilante. Like, I'm not cool with that. And then she's like, you're asking me to choose between you and my friends. And I think it's more like asking him to choose between being in a normal relationship or dying. But that's just me. And so they split. And then it becomes like, what a sexist that he's not cool with you running around and doing this. And I'm like, I think they'd be cool with it if perhaps you had a license, you were trained, I don't know. This is like a tough concept for like how much realism do you bring in versus how much do you just like lean in to the craziness. And so if you can like kind of get past the crazy premise, they are like fun books. But like as we've gotten farther into the series, these women like in the newer books aren't as connected to the crimes as the women in the first couple of books were. Like those ones were very personal, so it made sense that they were wading into these kind of mysteries. But in the more recent ones, they've been things that are kind of like disconnected from the group. So you're just like, how come you're getting involved with this gang, girl? So I will say I did like this book much more than the previous one because I believe that that one was Willow and Gabe, I think his name was, and I didn't really like them as a couple at all, but I did enjoy Luna and Nox. They were both really fun. Once they were together, there's like some pettiness involved, but it was kind of pettiness that I was getting into. Yeah, I'm curious to see where they go with this because I am looking forward to the next book, but yeah, I'm hoping that they stop arguing that like me getting to run around with a taser and hang out with mobsters is about feminism. Okay, now this is where things got weird. I did some rereads. The first one, don't look at this cover because again, this looks like something that like a 13-year-old made in 2012 on Facebook or Wattpad. But this book is called Surviving Raine, and actually I don't think that, you know, a lot of the book talk dark romance girlies would really consider this a dark romance, especially not, you know, today with what's going viral, but I think like, you know, maybe 10 years ago, everyone would have considered this a dark romance, and this is about as close to a dark romance as I really want to get into because this is like, you know, there are like sketchy things happening. He's got a very tragic, dramatic backstory, but he's not like committing crimes against the FMC. He's got like some issues. I'm sure a psychologist would love to talk to him, but he's not necessarily a Criminal Minds unsub, at least not towards our main female character. So that's really all you can ask for. Something that I think is really interesting with this book is that it's entirely from the male main character's point of view, which you don't really get with a lot of straight romances. So I feel like that's fun and kind of interesting and that it's done really well. And basically at the start of the book, you know, he's like really rough and tumble. He's been an alcoholic for quite some time. He has this boat that they charter out to rich people basically. He's kind of just getting through day to day, basically, trying to ignore the world. But one night the ship sinks and he winds up on a life raft. He sees one of the passengers and scoops her up and saves her, but then they're out to sea. And because of his past, which essentially is like human Hunger Games, it's the most dangerous game, basically, is what he was involved in. I don't want to spoil too much because you find things out about him as the story progresses, and that's a big part of it, is like him telling Raine, the girl, this other passenger, about his life and his backstory. So anyway, they're stranded on this life raft, but because of his past, he has a lot of survival skills, so he's kind of keeping them alive. Meanwhile, she knows nothing. But things that are making it more complicated is he was an alcoholic. He's going through withdrawals and he's not, you know, the most fun person to be around, but she's got nothing better to do with her time than pry. So they slowly start to get to know each other. He like does not know how to be around a normal person. He certainly doesn't know, he certainly has not really experienced normal affection before in his life. So Raine really throws him off. So they spend a lot of time on this raft. They spend some time stranded on an island as well. And I've learned some interesting stuff from this book. I've done some weird Google searches. I learned that actually drinking your own urine does not work if you are like dehydrated and have no water source. I texted that to a friend the first time I read this book because this was a reread. And she was like, no, Bear Grylls did it. So we're both like frantically Googling, don't do it. Which actually actually makes so much more sense. Why would drinking urine rehydrate you? I also tried to Google if like the fish spines hold water and if that's like a source of water, you know, if you're severely dehydrated. That I couldn't find a whole lot of information on, but I trust her. I believe she did her research about it. The book also has what I found to be a really, really sweet love confession. I won't explain how it goes off, but I really loved it. And I think this is really good. Like, I think it's a dark romance in that, like, his backstory is really rough, what he was involved in before. He's not, like, the nicest to her at the start of the book, but again, he wouldn't be convicted of anything that he did, you know? And yeah, we have this like really intense survival situation, but also so much of it is focused on their relationship building. I think it's just done really, really well. And the fact that it's all in his point of view, like we can see when he doesn't understand Raine's reaction to something because his like emotional regulation understanding thing is all out of whack because of his childhood and his upbringing and everything. So we can maybe understand what Raine's thinking or why she's reacting to certain things even when he doesn't. And I think that that's a really kind of tricky thing to pull off, but I think this book does a really good job of it. Okay, and then things got really, really weird. Nobody judge me, this is a safe space. I read Ensnared, which again, I've actually read this before. I've read the first 3 books and like, tell me why they're really good. And why I'm so invested in like the spider politics. This is one of those alien romances, like think Ice Planet Barbarians, which again, Ice Planet Barbarians was not the first thing to do it, but like it's the most famous example, you know? But I think this book is better. There's 3 books in the first series, and then there's like a spin-off series about Catan, the main guy's friends, and the other women. So basically in this first book, Catan, he's like a spider alien guy. And he lives in this, I think it's pronounced Takarol, I'm not sure, this spider society with this queen who is a tyrant. Like she's a really brutal leader and she really wants Catan and Catan really doesn't want her. Prior to the events of this book, Catan had been a weaver, but Zervashi started a war, the queen started a war with this other spider nation because she wanted purple dye. So she started this war over this resource, a lot of people died, Catan wound up being like a really good soldier. And then in the events of this book, he's just like living kind of out in the jungle separate from the city because he wants to avoid Zervashi and everything as much as possible. He finds this like crashed spaceship, but he doesn't know what it is. He finds these like pods with humans, but he doesn't know what they are. He's just like, these things are kind of gross. But this one, like, she's kind of intriguing, but still a little bit disgusting. And he accidentally wakes her up. She's still passed out, but she's out of her pod. And he's like, I don't know what this is, but I feel like I could keep it as a pet. I don't know. Takes her home. She wakes up. She's obviously like, this is scary. And then they have to like learn how to communicate with each other and everything. He's trying to avoid Zervashi, whatever. Eventually they know Zervashi is like not going to leave it alone, so they're realizing they're like gonna have to flee. But Ivy, the human woman, has like found out that there are other humans still alive, so she convinces him to like wake up these other humans. So the next book, the other humans have been woken up. He gets his friends involved to be like, let's get out of here. Next book, they're fleeing, and then another one, it's like the big war. And I was very invested in the politics of this planet. I think it's actually pretty well done. I think the spin-off series is kind of like, it is more like Ice Planet Barbarians, where it's like each book is a different couple, but it's kind of like the exact same plot every time, really. So those books are kind of reheating each other's nachos and reheating Catan and Ivy's nachos a little bit from the kind of like forced proximity solo thing from the first book. And they're really fun. I will say one thing with like Ice Planet Barbarians, like they're basically humans, but they're blue and they're really tall and they have a tail, but like they're basically humans. This book, they like personality wise are kind of like humans, but like they're so physically inhuman that like I couldn't even necessarily wrap my head around the descriptions. I think the descriptions of what they look like are good. It's just kind of like hard to picture or kind of like hard to wrap your head around as a developing romance when you're like reminded of what they look like. Like, this is maybe a bit much for me, but I do think that the books are actually pretty well written, especially the first 3. I think if you like had fun with the first 3, then the spin-off series is worth reading, but like the first 3 are legitimately kind of good. I think that like every time, especially in the first book and like part of the second book, every time Catan has like a confrontation with the queen, it's kind of the same thing over and over again. So it does get like a little bit repetitive that way, but also these books aren't that long, so like it's not drug out too much, I don't think. And yeah, you know what? It's a good time, who cares? So I reread the first one in this series, and then I read for the first time The Delver, which is the second book in the spin-off series. And this one, they like get stuck in a cave because he's like a miner, and she, for circumstances, winds up with him. There's a cave collapse, and they have to like find their way back out. But there are these other like spider people who live in the cave, and they're like cannibals. So it's very what's that movie called? The Descent. It's very much The Descent, but they're spider people. And again, I don't think that that one's as good as the first 3, because the first 3 legitimately fun, pretty good. I think that like the politics and the world building is really interesting. Sorry. Low-key, this and Surviving Raine, kind of the most fun ones I've read lately. And something that I do really like in the first one, again, this is kind of getting back into what they look like. They like don't smile like a normal person. So Ivy is like spending time with Catan, and he kind of starts to mimic her smile. Like when something amuses him or whatever, he'll like do his approximation of it. So then there's a scene where he's like with his friends and they don't know about Ivy yet, and something, you know, makes him laugh, so he goes to smile, and then he's like, wait, they don't know what that is. Like, they're gonna be like, what are you doing? So he shuts it down, but I feel like that's kind of cute. I don't know, that's just one that stuck out to me, but you know what? I recommend it. Go read Ensnared. And then things took like an abrupt shift, because then I reread Beowulf by Dahvana Headley. This is her verse translation. So Headley had written prior to this, like dystopian retelling of Beowulf, kind of based around Grendel's mother, where the Grendel's mother character is like a war veteran. But she explains in her introduction she didn't necessarily feel done with it, so she wound up doing her own translation. It's in more of like a free verse style instead of following the actual like Old English poetic structure, and she kind of frames it as a bro story. So typically the first line of Beowulf is translated as like, listen, hark, like it's some kind of call to attention, but she translates it as bro. And she talks about it in the introduction of her thinking about this as that kind of bro story, like older guys at a bar, you know, telling crazy stories about their youth and kind of one-upping each other. And that's kind of how she's framed or imagined Beowulf, as like an oral tale and also like the events in the poem. But I reread this because I'm going to be presenting a paper that I originally wrote at Oxford at a conference at the end of the month. And so I was rereading it, you know, reworking my paper and everything. My paper is about Headley's like treatment of the female characters, because that's kind of one of the most notable things about her translation, is how she kind of centers or brings forward female characters. I'm going to be focusing primarily on Grendel's mother, who she does not imagine as a monster, but as like a warrior queen, and kind of her rationality for doing so. And then I'm also going to be talking about the dragon, who generally is translated as kind of being genderless or translated with like he pronouns, but she explicitly makes the dragon female. So talking about like its effect on the story and what that kind of implies. So yeah, I don't know, I'm really excited to present it at the conference, and I really enjoy this version of Beowulf. It's one of my favorite things to ask medievalists, is like what they think of it, because I feel like people have very strong reactions. I think that it does really sort of toe the line between what's translation and what's adaptation. I think that it's a really, really interesting piece. So I would definitely recommend it if you're interested in Beowulf in Old English literature. I think it's interesting to read it alongside a kind of more quote-unquote traditional translation. I'd also be curious to hear from people who this was kind of their first introduction to Beowulf. I believe it was published in 2021 originally. I'd have to double check my notes. But yeah, really, really interesting. And that's everything that I've been reading over the last couple weeks. I've recently started Blood on Her Tongue, but I'm only a few chapters in, but I am loving it so far. Like, Gothic horror can't go wrong. I'm like 4 chapters in, we already have a bog body, so I'm not complaining. I love Johanna Van Veen's first book. I suspect I'm really, really gonna love this one too, so I've been really liking that. And yeah, next month I'm gonna be really getting into my comps list, so I don't know how much fun reading I'm gonna be able to do because this is my list so far. So it's not intimidating. Yeah, if I'm speaking in Middle English by September, slap me. But yeah, this month was kind of all over the place, but I've been having a really good time. So let me know what you've been reading or if you've read any of these books. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.